Good afternoon, and welcome to Invariant's Dialogue for Change, Tearing the Paper Ceiling and Uncovering New Talent. If you have questions for our panelists throughout the event, please type them into the chat box. Invariant's Dialogue for Change series facilitates conversations on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for companies and members of the policy community interested in engaging on relevant cultural and business issues. My name is Steve Weiler. I am the moderator for today's conversation. I'm a director with Invariant's government relations practice. I provide our clients with legislative strategies related to labor and employment, healthcare, data, tech, and a whole host of other issues. Before Invariant, I worked on the Committee for Education and Labor under Mr. Bobby Scott. I also worked in Leg Affairs for the Attorney General of Maryland and previously practiced labor and employment law in Baltimore. This leads me to today's conversation. Today, we will discuss the importance of addressing the paper ceiling in the workplace. According to the Tear the Paper Ceiling Coalition, which is made up of about 50 national organizations and led by the Ad Council and the Opportunity at Work, the paper ceiling is the invisible barrier or the lack of a four-year degree that prevents employees from advancing in their careers, even when they possess the necessary skills and qualifications to succeed. This barrier disproportionately impacts Black, Hispanic, rural, and veteran workers. According to the Tear the Paper Ceiling Coalition, between 2012 and 2019, nearly 70% of the jobs created were in occupations that required a bachelor's degree, even for these entry-level positions. The requirement is a barrier for millions of workers with in-demand skills and experiences, often overlooked for higher wage jobs. The paper ceiling is prevalent in tons of industries and affects people of all genders, races, and backgrounds. Unfortunately, this barrier is deeply entrenched in some workplaces, resulting in a talent drain, low employee morale, and a lack of diversity at the top. Nearly half of the workforce does not have a college degree, but has developed valuable skill sets through community college, workforce training, boot camps, certificate programs, military service, or on-the-job learning. These workers often will not receive an interview, even if they are entirely qualified for these jobs, because they do not have a college degree. That is the paper ceiling. Today's conversation will serve as a roadmap for companies seeking to address the paper ceiling and its effect on individuals and organizations. And most importantly, this conversation will help implement strategies and programs for how to overcome this paper ceiling. Now, I am pleased to move to the conversation portion of today's event, a discussion among four leading experts in addressing the paper ceiling. First is Boyd Rogers. Boyd is the Divisional Vice President and Lead Employment Counsel at TriNet, a professional employer organization providing small and medium-sized businesses with full-service HR solutions. Before TriNet, Boyd was a partner with the law firm Fisher Phillips and worked as the Vice President of Employee and Labor Relations at Geldman. Boyd is a longtime advisor for TriNet's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Welcome, Boyd. Next, we have Becca Driscoll. Becca serves as the future talent lead for Accenture North America, a global professional services company. She's the director of the company's apprenticeship program across the United States and Canada, where she works to break down barriers and expand equity and access to career opportunities at Accenture and beyond for high potential people in our local communities. Thank you for joining, Becca. Next up is Chandler Morse. Chandler serves as the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Workday, a leading provider of enterprise cloud services delivering financial management, human capital management, and analytics applications. Chandler stood up the Washington office for the company in late 2018 and was elevated to lead Workday's United States and global policy teams, as well as the sustainability strategy and reporting. Before joining Workday, Mr. Morse spent more than a decade on Capitol Hill working for Senator Jeff Flake for more than 13 years. Thank you for joining, Chandler. And then finally, we have Amelia Alcivar. Amelia joined Hilco Redevelopment Partners in 2023 as the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs. Amelia leads HRP's external affairs and communications efforts. Prior to joining HRP, Amelia spent 15 years in strategic communications, public affairs, and senior management roles in diverse states across the country, but most recently served as the Chief of Staff to Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. Thank you for joining, Amelia, and thank you to the four of you for being part of today's conversation. Our first category that we're going to talk about is skills and competency-based hiring. According to a study from the Harvard Business School, a growing number of companies are taking a skills-first approach to hiring, rather than relying on formal education and credentials, which is a great first step. While there's been progress made, there are still significant barriers that remain, from improving hiring screening algorithms to eliminating degree screenings for the hiring process. I'm going to start by posing a question to Becca. Could you first describe what is skills-based hiring? And can you describe some of the benefits that Accenture has experienced with the skills-based hiring initiatives?
Sure, and thanks, Steve, for the introduction and having us all here today. So just for a quick introduction on the program and kind of scope that I will be speaking to, Accenture, has seen for a number of years that a person's education credentials are not the only indicators of success. And we're very committed to evaluating candidates based on their skills, their experiences, and their potential. And a lot of that is based in the fact that the most important skill that we look for in any employee, regardless of level, is the ability to learn. And so we really have redefined how we think about potential. We think about that equation as, skills plus the learning agility and eagerness to learn, plus aspiration equals potential, right? And that helps us open doors, not only to find new talent, but also provides other people, folks with new career pathways that can fulfill their potential in different ways than we and other companies may have been able to historically. So one way that we do that is our North America Apprenticeship Program. Today, nearly half of Accenture's entry-level positions in the US are open to individuals who do not have a four-year degree. And one of those initiatives and programs is our North America Apprenticeship Program that we stood up really as an alternate pathway into roles that traditionally had required a four-year degree. And so that's where we think about, skills-based hiring and what does that mean? Again, we really think about, as we're working with candidates, one, are we going to the right places to reach a broader set of audience and a broader set of candidates beyond the typical campus and college university pathways? And then when we are interviewing, how do we focus on that skills-based hiring? How do we focus on bringing out that potential into the interview and the assessment process? And just to bring that to life, a few ways we do that in the recruiting process. One is we ask strengths-based questions, right? Like, how do you feel about working in an environment that is often challenging? To get a sense of the person's approach and their own experiences, whether that was from some coursework, from past work experience, from their personal lives, right? And we also ask candidates to do what we call a tech showcase. So in that, they get to pick any topic that they want related to technology, because no matter what any of us are doing, tech is infused in everything we all do, right? And they get to present it to their interviewer any way they want. Some candidates bring a PowerPoint deck, some bring, YouTube videos, some just talk through it. So it gives them agency to choose that, and it helps with their comfort level, right? Because they're in control. They know what the question is that's asked of them. And it lets us get a peek into the candidates' critical thinking skills and their general, knowledge of the technology that they chose. And we've seen really strong results from our apprenticeship program. The majority of our apprentices are racially and ethnically diverse. Nearly half are female. Both of those things are more challenging, especially as we are predominantly in the tech space. And we have hired an overwhelming majority of individuals who complete the apprenticeship program into full-time roles and continue to see high retention from our program graduates as they continue on with Accenture.
That's great. I think you said two things that I really like: going to people that want and have the ability to learn, and you're going to the right places, and you're broadening that pipeline of talent, which is fantastic. I think this leads perfectly to Amelia. While you were with Governor Hogan, one of the programs that you helped launch, which I believe was the first in the nation at the time, and still might be. It was a program to recruit qualified workers who didn't hold college degrees for state jobs. What were some of the lessons that you learned and advice you would share with other states or even businesses looking to implement Maryland really as the model for this?
Sure. Well, thank you, Stephen, and thanks for having me. This is a great discussion and something that, we were incredibly proud of in the Hogan administration to pioneer. I will say I'm very happy to report that it's actually now a bipartisan initiative. I believe Governor Josh Shapiro, new governor of Pennsylvania, was the second state government in the U.S. to launch a similar initiative at the state government level. And I'm sure there's been others exploring similar paths to date. So I don't want to leave anyone out, but I was really pleased to see Governor Shapiro do that when he came into office. As with many things in the public sector, we were solving for something, right? We all across, public and private entities, we all had trouble, recruiting and retaining talent during and after the pandemic. And so that, unique set of challenges gave rise to a process where we challenge ourselves to think outside the box and say, what are some unique solutions? Obviously, there are initiatives that we could and did do to increase salaries, to try to provide additional flexibility for state workers. But as most of you have been interacted with the public sector in some way, as there are, there are guardrails that you have to stay within. You're not a startup where you can just decide how much you pay everybody. There's, classes and a whole system that, where it has to be very incrementally done. So while we were doing more, taking more traditional approaches, again, like looking at, increases, bonuses, retention, benefits, things of that nature, we were also looking at how can we expand our pool of workers that might be interested in these state jobs. And it became clear to us that there was a few different types of workers, all of whom would be qualified for a lot of the positions that we were having trouble filling. And one thing they had in common was lack of a four-year degree. And one thing that those positions had in common, and I'm speaking in some generality, but was a four-year degree requirement that in many cases was arbitrary in nature, or there was alternate experience that could fit the same skill set that was needed. One of the groups that I found this really interesting, one of the groups was second income earners, right? Where during the pandemic, a lot of second income earners stopped working. Those are, we looked at those earners and said, these are people where a state job where maybe the salary is not as high as you could, as an equivalent job in the private sector, but the benefits that come with with a public sector, with a state job, are very attractive to someone who's, potentially someone who's got small children or who, is a kind of a family supporter. It brings that tangible benefit, particularly if you have another income in the household. Why are those people not applying for these jobs? And again, that was, we identified that particularly as, as you mentioned, Stephen, leading in, among a diverse workforce as a barrier to entry. Right around this time, I kind of I'll be honest, I had a chance meeting with one of the founders of the organization called Opportunity at Work, Byron August, who had served an advisory position on jobs and workforce in the Obama administration, was a Maryland guy and had done a lot of work in Prince George's County, Maryland. And that planted a seed and we started exploring. We put our Department of Labor together with, his team and Opportunity at Work, and we brought in some outside expertise. And, another thing we realized is that we spent, I think a lot of states and a lot of companies spend a lot of time on workforce development, on seeding that pipeline. And those initiatives often focus around, skills training, certificate programs, community college, and then the jobs aren't there on the other end. And so, we challenged ourselves to say, okay, we felt really great about our workforce development track record, and I'll speak that maybe a little bit later. But we're not kind of putting our money where our mouth is with the 60,000 state jobs we have and having actual employment opportunities for people that go through those, non-traditional career training programs. So we did an assessment. The last thing I'll say is obviously you need to roll this out in a responsible manner, and ensuring that individuals have commensurate skills. So we did it. We took some time. We did an analysis and assessment. We looked at positions where, we did look at other, private sector companies that had done this. We looked at, where there were some synergies among, job responsibilities. And we actually used some of our workforce development programs as that measuring stick, right? Like, what are the skills we're saying that this person coming out of this certificate program has? okay, where are the jobs in the state that require those same skills? Let's drop the degree requirements and, and put in a, commensurate experience requirement. Some of the sectors we targeted real quick, I'm sure some experts will get to this, is, obviously administrative support, administrative positions, that was low hanging fruit. But we also really targeted accounting, finance positions, IT positions. Our state CISO did not have a 4-year degree. He had military experience and, was someone that was incredibly well respected. So the last piece I'll say is, breaking stigma and educating people was really critical. That this wasn't an effort to, particularly as it was coming in response to some of the challenges of the staffing shortages, brought on by COVID. We wanted to be really intentional to ensure this wasn't seen as a diluting of the workforce or as a weakening of qualifications. And by, finding tangible examples of the types of people that we were talking about, was really helpful in bringing people along and making people understand that they just had to think. Some of us, like myself, who went to an overpriced 4-year college and don't really do a whole lot with that degree, had to realize that, there's more than one path, and someone that you see as a peer and see as just as qualified, may have gotten there in a non-traditional way. So I hope that answered your question, but it was a long road, but we were really pleased to be able to get it done. And I know the new administration in Maryland is continuing on with the program.
That is fantastic. And as a proud Pennsylvanian, everyone at Invariant knows I wear it on my sleeve. I'm happy to hear that they've taken that up, but I think you're exactly right. This solves a problem. There is a workforce shortage, and this is bringing in qualified candidates for this position. Building on the tech piece, I think Becca mentioned it and Amelia mentioned it, and now Chandler, this is a perfect segue into what you do. So coming from the tech perspective and a company that's all in on those skills, where do you see the role of technology in helping candidates promote these skills and those already in roles grow those skills so they can further their career?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, also thanks for putting this discussion together, and really pleased to be on with sort of folks from Maryland. That it was Governor Hogan's work there was a real leadership position, and we've watched it sort of unfold in other states like Colorado and Utah, and similarly pleased to see the incoming administration take it on. So that's great. As you mentioned, Workday is the leading provider of enterprise cloud applications for finance, human resources, and planning. We have about 10,000 customers, organizations as customers, and that includes about half of the Fortune 500. I think from our perspective, if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that the future of work is here, and that it's includes unbelievably rapid change. So something that we just have to get used to. The World Economic Forum, for example, looked at, said that about half of the jobs that are out there now are going to need, some sort of new skills in the next couple of years. And if you start to put the math, paper to pencil with, that's about 1 billion workers that need to be reskilled by 2030. So we, like everyone here, I think, although we haven't heard from Boyd, but given his background, I'm sure he agrees. Yet we think skills are central to navigating the changing nature of work, and we deliver on that in sort of the way we think about talent internally, about the way we innovate, and then the way we also are trying to shape skills-based policies, which we'll get to, because my sort of bailiwick is that sort of policy piece. Internally, and love the comments from Becca, we're also looking at widening the pool of talent by looking at skills over potential job title, removing college degrees, intentionally looking at sort of sources outside of the sort of usual places in new places, and then through programs like our Opportunity and On-Ramps program that provides untapped talent with diverse backgrounds with training, internships, and job opportunities. But in many ways, and I hope I'm not going to offend anyone, in many ways we've been talking about skills for years, right? I mean, like this is not a new conversation. And it might be a little bit like the barber telling you need a haircut, right? So you ask the tech guy, like, well, what's changed? And I'm going to say that I think technology is really the game changer. That's been the critical enabler to bringing skills to scale. So for us, that starts with our skills cloud. So we take a machine learning driven skills ontology where and an ontology is sort of a very glorified way of saying vocabulary. And one of the things that we know about skills data is it's really messy. It's really confusing. People use the same terms for a bunch of skills. They all refer to 1,000 terms for the same skill. And so when you want to have a basis on which to really get your arms around that spaghetti of the millions of different ways skills are referred to, that's where technology comes in to sort of help organize it, clean it, sort of translate it, put it into context, and that's what our Skills Cloud does. So our Skills Cloud provides a common vocabulary and a map of how different skills relate to each other, but then also how they're sort of evolving over time. And through that sort of basis, we can build on features that help workers better describe their skills. I always think about this when the last time I had to apply for a job, like frankly, coming off the hill, it's exhausting and you're tired and you're doing it sort of after your day job. And somebody says, well, what skills do you have? And I'm going to pick the top 3 to get through the application and move on. And that's going to undervalue sort of what I do and what I bring to the table. And so a big part of what we do is we provide these tools to really wrap our arms around how workers and candidates can better explain the skills that they have, identify the ones that they have currently, some that they might not be thinking of the right way or thinking how to describe or self-advocating by having in the mix, but then also the ones that they need to sort of grow their careers and help identify those tracks. In addition, Skills Cloud technology helps companies really, we've heard about the skills gap, and this really starts to put some words on that and put it down on paper and really allow people to, companies to see the skills that they need, as well as how they can sort of track their workforce planning in a way that really takes advantage of, in our opinion, their most valuable resources, which are their people. So our Skills Cloud powers features for our customers that drive like a talent marketplace where internal folks can, identify the skills that they have, and folks that need work done can identify the skills that they need, and we can start to make some marriages of short-term gigs. And the part that I'm most excited about is it also drives things like our Career Hub, which starts to put a plan in place of sort of like, hey, here's where you are, and where do you want to go, and what's open, and what opportunities, what skills could you add that could sort of start to drive, a pathway to greater opportunity. I cut my teeth on immigration issues with Senator Flake. And so I spent a lot of time on the sort of lower end entry level skill, worker issues. And when I start to see that Career Hub and that really real meat on the bone, real thoughts about, hey, these are the skills you have and these are the ones you can add, and really starting to drive a career path, that starts to really excite me, to be honest with you. So from our perspective, these technological tools like Skills Cloud, they're the backbone that end up enabling us to go from conversations about skills to really skills at scale in large chunks of the economy.
Something that jumped out to me was how do you talk about those skills that you have? And I remember same thing coming off the hill and coming out of law school. It was writing the resume in a way that showcased those skills that I picked up. And on the HR side of things for Boyd, someone that was creating a resume knowing that it would be picking up certain keywords. Are there best practices that companies can employ to ensure that hiring practice don't perpetuate the paper ceiling? And is there a role for managers to play in this type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And just want to again say thank you for the opportunity to be here with this distinguished panel. I'm learning as I go. Lifelong learning is always a good thing. So the answer is yes. There are a lot of things that an HR organization or a people organization can do to address these issues and to figure out exactly how to tap this relatively untapped market. So of course, at TriNet, we serve thousands of customers across the United States. Our customer focus is small and mid-sized businesses, which we know are the economic engine of the United States. And so that's where we really focus our efforts in trying to educate and to help and assist with those who are seeking talent. That's been one of the big challenges, as has been noted. The one thing I want to start with sort of on a foundational level is that the choices that got us here, where we are today talking about this problem, were made by humans. So the choices to get us out or resolve the challenge also belong to humans. Now, Chandler has explained in detail the assist that technology can give us, and the technology in some ways, and I think we could admit this, may have contributed to overlooking qualified candidates and those without degrees, and I'm sure it has, but the technology is not going to be accountable to itself. we have to be accountable to ourselves as HR leaders and as market leaders and as managers to making sure that we are starting at the right place and that we're becoming aware and are aware and remain aware in the hiring process, the talent acquisition process of how we can do better and how we can address the adverse impact on these populations that Steve described earlier. So there's lots of fundamental questions, like companies can ask themselves, how long has it been since we updated our job descriptions? I mean, who wrote the job description? Does it still reflect the skills and talent that are needed to perform in any given role? You can identify sort of stellar, outstanding performers, like exceptions, if you will, in your existing workforce. That is, identify individuals without college degrees who are solid performers, and then articulate and write down what skills and qualifications they have that could help you lead to a reconsideration or rewriting of a job description to accurately reflect the company's need. Another thing here is unconscious bias. We all have it in one way, shape, or form. We need to call it out. We need to admit to ourselves that we do have an unconscious bias. I think the research shows that those with college degrees are much more likely to almost intuitively believe that college degrees are required or necessary for jobs in their areas of expertise, which may or may not be true, but nevertheless, we should still question that and call it out. Of course, this also applies to recruiters, sourcers, other talent acquisition professionals who we should think about empowering and training to coach and guide hiring managers, not only on job descriptions, but also on the real qualifications for the roles and also their selections. Who do they want to take a look at? Who do they want to interview? And who ultimately are they going to select for a particular role? At the same time, we can train managers to think critically about what attributes they are looking for in workers for which they're substituting a college degree. In other words, what does possession of a college degree imply for that hiring manager? What is the why behind the requirement or a desire for a degree? Because it is in many cases substituting for an attribute or a trait or skills that have names and can also be possessed by non-degree holders. So there are times you have to ask hard questions of hiring managers. For example, what would you prefer someone with a college degree achieved after 5 or 6 years and a 1.7 GPA over someone without a degree, but who has 4 or 5 years of experience and developed skills? Which one would you really prefer in the real world, the real market? And then another item that, again, this costs money, and so not every organization can do it, but ask whether your organization has the need and budget to basically create the skills in the applicant market, talent market, through an apprenticeship program. Can you partner with the high schools in your local area or a community college to prepare young adults for the workplace without requiring a 4-year degree? In other words, can you create the kind of employees that your business needs through investment early on, and then look for ways to retain those? And we heard from Becca earlier that Accenture's had very good results in retaining the folks who have come through their program that have been focused precisely on this market. So there are some of the areas where HR can start and focus.
So I think a theme I hear you say, so while tech has been super valuable, it's the person, the people, the managers, we have a responsibility, the companies, we have a responsibility to do better when looking for the talent and looking for the skills. Before we jump into our next section, John Buckley asked, and I'll ask this to the group, do you see tested certifications with continuing ed requirements and state licensing expanding to become alternate paper to bachelor degrees?
I'm happy to jump in quickly. I don't know that it will be a complete, one-to-one, but I do think that's something that is increasing, right? There are a number of, there's just such a proliferation of certifications and different credentials that is growing in the market that I do think is adding additional ways for individuals to show, right, their credentials and their skill set in a little bit more of a measurable way, right? In addition to listing their skills and their experiences in resumes and in conversations. So, I don't know how much it will, come in or replace, but we've definitely seen that increase of certifications. I think that potential is that it's such a crowded market now, right? Validating the quality of so many different types of credentials can be challenging.
Right, thank you, Becca. So the next section that we're going to talk about is training and development opportunities.
Just gonna say, Amelia, it looks like you were on mute.
I was, can I jump in for 2 seconds?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to jump on the licensing, state licensing piece, because, I don't know the answer. Is that going to become an alternate means of certification and proof of skills? It certainly makes sense that it would, because, I think to everyone's point, employers do need to verify that an employee has the skills to do the job. But I think that's where it would be incumbent upon public policymakers to really look at occupational licensing reform, and to look, because that in it of itself, we found in Maryland, I also worked in Texas state government, it was a huge issue there, is a barrier to entry, particularly for Black and brown communities. Getting that license, having someone who owns a hair braiding studio or hair braiding business, where this is a notorious example, but where washing hair is not part of that process. That's not what that service provider does, but they're still licensed as a hair salon. So they have to comply with these onerous requirements of having a number of sinks and having various, other, implementation devices around the workplace that, aren't really relevant. So that's one example. There's millions of them. I do think that, if that's going to be an avenue where there's more and more focus in terms of, using that as a way to certify skills, really public policymakers, there's some great examples across the country in different states. Utah is one, Arizona is another. It's again, kind of a bipartisan initiative across different states where we're looking at licensing reciprocity tools to remove that as a barrier to entry for, small business owners and for diverse workers who are looking to show their skills.
Great, absolutely. Thank you, Amelia. To jump into our next section is training and development opportunities, which organizations and companies, they've seen the value in investing in training and development programs for their people to not only help employees acquire the skills and competencies to advance, but ensure that companies are creating a robust pipeline of talent throughout. So for Becca, how does Accenture incentivize skills-based hires to stay and grow as employees with the company? And how does Accenture encourage on-the-job learning for employees?
For us, it's really built into our DNA. We don't have a product, we have people, we have consultants that we bring to our clients to help solve problems and implement the latest technology. And so skills-based, just ongoing development and ongoing on-the-job learning is fundamental for every single one of our employees. At Accenture, people at all levels have opportunities to continuously build leadership capabilities and grow each of our careers through job-specific digital and industry skills training. That is ongoing for each and every one of our employees. And so partly, I think that's why our apprenticeship program is so successful, right? It's built into our culture, is continuous learning and on-the-job learning, right? So for our apprenticeship program, as with any apprenticeship, there are very specific, both structured learning components, right, across both the functional or technical skills, as well as the professional kind of corporate skills, as well as the on-the-job learning, right? Shadowing employees, getting your hands-on experience within the project work and increasing your responsibility as you do so. We also know that while we may hire people for a certain set of skills at one point, that rate of change that was mentioned earlier, right, in the need for new skills is so rapid that we are always investing in the development of our people. We invest about $1 billion a year in training, reskilling, and leadership development of our employees. One example is several years ago, we put in place what we call our technology quotient training, our TQ training, that helps our people understand, articulate, and apply advanced technology concepts that are changing the future, right? Because for any of our roles, I sit in HR. I am not, I say all the time, I am probably the least tech savvy person at Accenture, but I know now how to explain blockchain and all of these concepts that are just ingrained in everything we do, right? So those are elements that we infuse for all of our employees, including our apprentices. And really, once you're here, right, and we've seen this as our apprentices have stayed and have had longevity in their careers and high retention after completing the program, continued progression and promotion and recognition is based on the work that you're delivering, right? And the skills that you continue to develop. And so it is incentivized for each and every one of our employees to continuously develop our skills. And it is recognized, right, in continued advancement opportunities.
I think investing in the people is probably a reason why the culture is so strong at Accenture. So it sounds, fantastic, the work that you are doing there. But in this kind of training and development world, Boyd, what steps can the organizations take to ensure that these types of development and training opportunities, like the ones that Becca talked about, are accessible and equitable? So it's not just for the senior leaders, it's not just for management, but for the company as a whole. So the people are learning the talents and the skills to see the dividends throughout.
Sure, that's a great question, and I benefited from the fact that TriNet also has a robust learning and development program where there are lots of offerings for employees of all different types of levels and skill sets. I think one thing to sort of a foundational approach to this is it's important to have a culture of continuous learning. We need to be very candid with employees in our organizations and with applicants that static skills are not sufficient. What you bring to an organization is enough to get you in the door, but in order to succeed, you are really going to have to continue to build on your skills. And so I know there are some who believe still that, once I got my degree, I can be finished with this. I don't have to learn anymore. I don't have to go back to a classroom, but the marketplace today demands continuous learning. There's just no way around it. And we need to not surprise people with that when there's a layoff or reduction in force and say, well, you just don't have the skills anymore. We need to be investing in them. And so that culture is very important. So let me start, Steve, I think your question was about accessible and also equitable. So accessible would imply that the training and professional development programs are open and made available to all employees. So the organization can do a self-assessment and can ask, and they can use employee surveys to do this, to gauge how well they are marketing these programs internally. Does everybody know about them? Are they truly open to everyone? If there are some programs that are geared to a particular population that may be a bit more familiar, are there more, baby steps that we can implement to get people to those, or are they targeted to the right levels within their organization? How are we communicating their availability to our workforce? Did we stick it on the internet one time back in 1984 and just figure that it's there and somebody will see it eventually? Are we emailing it out? Does everybody have email? Do they have ability to get emails? How are we marketing that, and how successful are we being? And look at communication channels. Today's workforce is all over different types of, again, going back to technology. Are we putting it in front of their faces in the workplace, in a place where they are working with their tools and with their methods? And are we including it in regular conversations? Are we talking about education in town hall meetings? Are we talking about them in the department meetings? Are we talking about them in team meetings? Are we talking about them in individual performance evaluations and coaching sessions? And another thing, again, it's a budgetary item for some organizations, and not everyone can do this. And small and medium-sized businesses like TriNet serves are going to have to take a look at some of this. But do you offer any incentives or recognition to employees who complete a training or a series of trainings? Do you have any kind of internal certification programs where you can become, a titanium level master at some particular thing? Because those types of recognitions go a long way towards incentivizing people. And then you can choose with your organization, do we incentivize that also with some sort of monetary award of some sort? Now, the equitable piece implies that the training and development programs are tailored and customized to particular individuals or particular groups. And that is going to frankly require a whole lot more work and a whole lot more deliberate thought. And I think you have to start with, again, identifying what are the needs of the company? Where are the skills gaps? Are they business acumen? Are they communication skills? Are they problem solving skills? Or the Excel skills? I am completely out of my element in Excel. I went to law school. I didn't think I was going to have to deal with numbers, and guess what? I do all the time. And so one of my goals this year in terms of personal development is to brush up on my Excel skills. But that's a need that I've identified. But the organization can identify those skills within their organizations. It could be a variety of things. Are managers integrating the company's curriculum planning efforts are integrated with the planning efforts by, say, a talent management or a learning development function to make sure that what is happening in the workplace, like at the customer service level, at the line employee level, that those are aligned with what the actual offerings are? Or are we offering some sort of highfalutin type of educational things that just don't have any value for every employee. Are we taking into account person's development and educational achievements in the performance evaluation process? And what are the incentives, again, that companies have in place that will match the development needs of the employee or the group of employees when we're talking about equitable type of training availability with the company's need for talent? So this is a multi-function approach that really has to be brought together and led and pushed so that all of those factors are integrated in this culture of learning.
I think one of the things that comes up with that, and what I hear you saying, is companies need to think creatively how they do this. It's about meeting the people where they are, meeting the employees where they are in terms of what they're looking for and how they access that type of communication. So whether it's email, whether it's text messages, it's about thinking creatively, not only of the programs that should be offered, but the ways that they communicate, and even merit as well. So it's not just financially, but it could be a certificate and an award. And I think that's a really great way for companies to start thinking about this. For Chandler, this is an area that my committee at least thought about a bit, and that's apprenticeship programs and opportunities through that. So the federal government thinks a lot about training and development opportunities and apprenticeship programs. This was a core element in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. What should the federal approach be in this area, and how can the federal government better promote programs that provide career and training services?
First off, I would like Becca to do a quick in-service on blockchain, since she's got all that expertise built up. No, yeah. Look, I could talk for, this is super interested in this topic and what the federal government can do here, because it's not super intuitive in how the sort of legislative process can be used to kind of drive forward or supplement or the first thing I would point to is that we're really pleased to see the Biden administration make strengthening and empowering the federal workforce a top priority for the president's management agenda. I don't know sort of how widely viewed that was, but if you do take the time to look at the president's management agenda, it's detailed, it's thoughtful. Also sort of a little bit buried in the weeds, but OPM has released federal skills-based hiring guidance, which builds on one, sort of signals the importance and recognition of a skills-based approach from the federal government's perspective, and frankly builds on, this now spans two presidents' work, because the original EO came out under the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration picked it up and implemented guidance. And Congress has gotten into the act. The House recently passed the Chance to Compete Act in January, second time they'd passed it, and that was passed with a bipartisan vote of 422-2, which is like, I spent a long time on the Hill, and like, why that didn't go by voice, I don't know, but I'm glad to be able to point out like a 422-2 vote. It really shows bipartisan support, and that act looks at sort of continuing on the guidance for skills-based hiring OPM released, and providing agencies one, some statutory cover, and two, some additional tools. So like, from our perspective, there are not even green shoots, but like long green grasses growing in this end of things from the federal government, which we think, as the country's largest employer, send all the right signals. And we probably need to do a little bit better job of amplifying those signals. Clearly, that's being picked up by the states, as we discussed earlier. The list of states that are looking to do this is getting longer. So those are all the right moves. You mentioned WIOA. It's near and dear to my heart. One of which is a strange thing to say. It's not near and dear to many people's heart, I don't think. But if we're going to move forward in a skills-based approach at scale, one of the things we really, and I think the COVID pandemic really showed this, was we need high quality labor data, and we need high quality labor data fast, and we need it countrywide, and we need it granular, and we need it about emerging skills and roles. And one of the things I think we found in the COVID pandemic was how limited the turnaround time on some of the economic indicators that come out of federal sources. They're great, and they weren't built to handle the economy turning upside down. They'll be the first to say that, but things are changing so quickly that even sort of technologies from the government that were well positioned a few years ago, like ONET, are just lagging, and they're lagging so far behind that they're hard to be actionable. And again, I want to be clear, we're very interested in emerging roles and skills, like what's sort of coming in the economy, what was there now that wasn't there yesterday, that sort of a responsive skills approach needs to be able to pick up. That was never ONET's job. ONET was to do a longitudinal study of skills over time. And so again, when you say like, this doesn't fit that, this tool doesn't fit this problem, ONET will be the first to say we were never intended to fit that problem. So we've actually developed model legislation that sort of builds on some of the tools the WIOA put in place to really drive real-time, actionable, granular, economy-wide data on skills, really to get to the question, if you're in Montana and you were laid off and you've got access, the federal government spends a tremendous amount of money on workforce development programs. So if you're in Montana and you got laid off and you've got access to programming, how do you answer the question like, well, what should I go get reskilled in? What are the couple of skills I can add that can lead to real economic opportunity? And to answer those questions, you really have to know, finger on the pulse of what's going on in the economy. So we think there's a role for Congress to take a look at some of those data pipelines. We think there's a willingness on the employer side there's a desire to have that data as well. And we know that workers can benefit from having that kind of data in the milieu. The last thing I'll say, and we sort of mentioned, we think artificial intelligence is going to be a continued part of this conversation, and hearkening back to a few of those, our view, Workday's view of AI in this space is to provide inferences for humans in the loop, to augment human decision making. That human decision making is essential and is really important. And so from our perspective, there are things that the federal government can do to both build trust in AI technology and support innovation in this space. The NIST recently put out an AI risk management framework, which we think does a really good job of starting that conversation. There's more that we would like to see happen around safeguards and ensuring that this technology is used responsibly, but that's a good start. And we're heavily engaged with AI policy conversations in Europe and DC, around the States. So we think it's probably not just the federal government, but probably a lot of governments should be looking at sort of how that's implemented in a way to make sure it's done right. So there's a lot to do.
Absolutely. And I think AI is one of those areas I think we're going to see Congress continue to pay a lot of attention to, the administration. It's one I know that's been busy this week, last week, and it will be for the next little bit. So moving from the federal now to the state.
I do want to, and it's an issue they should be paying attention to, and that we want them to pay attention to, because it's important.
Absolutely. So moving from the federal to the state side of things, and Amelia, you talked about this a little bit earlier, that one of the reasons that Maryland instituted the program that you talked about earlier was to solve a problem, and that was to address the labor needs and shortages in the state. How did rescinding that 4-year degree requirement build Maryland's pipeline of talent, and how did the program tackle reskilling and ongoing learning for existing state employees?
Sure. So to first of all, 1,000 times yes on the data pipeline for labor data. It's complicated, but just the lack of visibility was really challenging for policymakers to figure out, where were the problems and where were the opportunities. To your question, we rolled this program out about 4 months before leaving office, and no, that's not true. About 8 months before leaving office. And so I can't really speak to, I don't think we have enough empirical data to talk about results in any kind of a final or kind of conclusionary way. But I will say this, we were tracking vacancies across all state agencies. There's about 40 in Maryland. So it's a large state government, again, about a workforce, about 60,000 jobs across all public entities. And we did see, and in agencies where we removed the degree requirements for approximately 50% of state jobs. And they, they tended to be an overlap between open positions and vacancies, and the positions where there was I think it was about a 70% overlap, if I recall correctly, between the, vacancies and those jobs we were moving degree requirements from. So they were, disproportionately impacted by that action. We were seeing an uptick in applications and in filling of vacancies, we weren't like, again, I don't want to, kind of dilute data and be, be intellectually dishonest about it, but we were seeing a meaningful impact, especially at agencies where we really targeted some of those requirement reductions. And also, we also were doing more to, to market the jobs, right? It was part of a larger strategy. We had a budget and we did spend some money. And to Boyd's point, not every organization can do that, but we did spend some money to, advertise on more platforms, to try to position the state in a different way. There was, and, as we were leaving office, there was some talk around, doing even a larger marketing effort around some of the, the benefits of state jobs, in a time where people's, many workers are changing their view of work-life balance and of the role of work. And there's, again, we saw some opportunity for, jobs that maybe had seemed, kind of boring in kind of different cultural moments, where there's more and more opportunity for certain, Americans who are just making a different decision about how they want their work-life balance to net out. I do want to mention one other thing, though, on this topic of workforce development and apprenticeships, because that's something I think the public sector has really focused on. And there was some talk earlier about the federal side. And I think this is, to Boyd's point again about the overhead costs of some of these skills trainings for employers, especially kind of small and medium-sized employers. I think this is a really ripe area for public-private partnerships because, as I said earlier, we realized that we kind of, when Governor Hogan came into office, he was very focused on partnering with the private sector, on making Maryland, a better partner for business. And, workforce development skills training was a huge way to do that. And so we really honed in. I'll mention two programs briefly, on programs that partnered with private sector employers on the front end to figure out what they needed, and then created the apprenticeship or training program to fit those needs, versus, just kind of churning these programs that existed where there weren't jobs for people on the other side. And one is a program called EARN. It's a Maryland specific program. I don't think it's part of a larger national program. And that was, where we partner with employers who had, distinct vacancies. They actually would sponsor apprentices as they went through, because we identified a huge barrier to entry is people they can't afford to do the apprenticeship or the training if you're not able to make meaningful income during that time. And that, again, disproportionately impacts underserved populations. So the EARN program would partner with employers who would, sponsor and pay at least a stipend type salary, at least some type of salary to the apprentice or trainee that was moving through the program. And then if that person successfully completed the program, they would have a job waiting for them on the other end. And that was targeted toward, kind of college age and adult workers. We also did a program that is a national program. It was started by IBM, but now has a number of large corporate partners, called PTech, Pathways in Career Technology. And PTech is a high school level program where a large employer, a high school, and generally public charter schools, but there are examples of just traditional public high schools, and a higher education institution will all partner. It's a 6-year program concentrated in STEM fields, although Marriott's a partner, so there's a hospitality track. And the high school student will get a high school degree. They'll take community college courses and end up with at least community college credits, sometimes a certificate, and they'll have a work study internship and a first in the door to employment opportunities with that company that sponsors that program. So again, we focus on an area where there's the training is training people for jobs that actually exist in companies that are actually looking. What we realized when we launched our state jobs initiative is that we weren't taking our own medicine, right? We weren't following our own, our own principles, that we weren't looking at the state as an employer. And so that was how we reimagined the state as an employer and not just a facilitator of these programs that were aimed at, filling jobs with other employers. And I think that allowed us to really put a capstone on and come full circle on our workforce development initiatives.
I think the public-private partnerships are an absolutely critical part of this. And I think we can all speak to kind of the success we've seen in that. Just in probably the 4 or 5 minutes we have left, ask our panelists about mentorship and networking. So we'll have to be brief here. I think you could tell we could all talk about this for much longer than an hour. But one of the most effective ways that we've seen to address and avoid the paper ceiling is by setting up strong mentorship and networking programs that provide guidance, support, and exposures to new positions and practice areas. That can be internal or external. And relationships fostered in these settings can really help break down the barriers of the paper ceiling, because it provides access to information, resources, resources, connections that otherwise might not be available. So Boyd, for organizations or leaders looking to establish these mentorship or networking programs, what are the best practices for some of those?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'll be brief in light of the time. I think any organization needs to identify and articulate what it is it wants to achieve with a mentorship and networking program. What are the desired outcomes? Put those down in writing, get buy-in from your senior leaders and managers, let people know that it's going to take time to develop these. It means time away from their normal jobs, and that this work is just as important for the workforce as the work that they're doing, on the sort of quote 9 to 5, 9 to 6 basis. You don't have to be fancy or corporatize it. You can do it. You got to have some expectations, especially around mentorships, about how long it's going to last, who's going to contact who. It's great to have HR facilitate the first meeting between a mentor and a mentee. And then in terms of networking, I don't know how many companies are still, sort of that hunkered down pandemic mode, but there used to be a lot of activities that companies would do that really got scaled back. And maybe they haven't come back in full force yet, but just getting people together in a room and articulating why we're putting people together in a room, even if it requires a little bit of travel spend and some food spend and some entertainment spend, perhaps, just doing that will do a great service to employees looking for those relationships within the company on a less formal basis.
It takes time, but it's definitely worth the time. And I think to that point, and we talked about it earlier and throughout, is it really builds the culture too, those types of networking events within a company. For Amelia, how does Hilco use networking and mentorships to eliminate barriers to entry and transform the talent pipeline?
Sure. So I'll say something that I know is going to be controversial for maybe my fellow panelists or some listeners. We have, at Hilco, we've really focused on an in-person work culture, and that's not a one size fits all, right? That's not for everybody. I acknowledge there's many roles that can be done, but we are in a very tangible industry. What we do is we acquire, environmentally remediate and redevelop obsolete industrial sites. So power plants, steel mills, et cetera, that are in major cities. That's, incredibly tangible work. It requires not just people to be physically working on the sites, but also people like me to be physically in the communities with our partners, educating, partnering. We do a ton of workforce development in-house. We build not just workforce around construction jobs, which obviously, is a traditional place for workforce development, but we work on getting non-traditional workers into tracks in engineering, architecture, and some of we have a huge focus in life sciences and the innovation economy. So, that we walk the walk, but we internally within the company, I've seen how much incredible professional development has happened with people that came in fairly junior and now, a couple of years later have either moved into different roles or really, rapidly grown in their careers. And I do think that, it's my opinion, I think a lot of that goes down to having a culture where people are encouraged to be in the room. You get to sit in a meeting, that's how I learned. And I think that, companies should at least think about if there feels like there's a lack of mobility, a lack of engagement, and a lack of employee enthusiasm, one thing to think about is trying to provide those opportunities for real meaningful face-to-face or interactive, in whatever format it is, contact for particularly more junior employees.
I am very much in agreement. I'm an in-person person, and the things I pick up from my colleagues that you wouldn't over Zoom. Completely agree. I've learned a lot just kind of listening to some of my colleagues here. For Becca, what role can managers play in advocating for ongoing learning, networking opportunities, and helping alternatively skilled employees succeed?
Yeah, it's so critical. I do want to start by saying that I think there's a lot that managers can do. It's also about supporting the managers, right? And training them to be set up for success, right? Not just throwing them into it, but giving them some coaching and some development so that they are set up for success. And then with that, a few key things in particular to support and work with alternatively skilled employees, right? And helping them succeed. I think one, for a lot of folks coming without a degree, this may be their first corporate experience or their first experience in anything that looks similar to your workplace, right? And so making the implicit explicit is critical, right? If someone's never had a meeting on Zoom, they may not know how to do that. They may not know the protocol that may be assumed, but don't make those assumptions, right? So I think that's really important for managers to think about all of those unwritten rules and really making the implicit explicit so that we can set clear expectations, right? And then people know how to succeed and what is being expected of them. And another that came up, Chandler, as you were talking about the skills dialogue, right? Helping individuals identify what their transferable skills are and how to translate that into your kind of corporate speak, right? I came from the nonprofit sector. Business development there means something completely different than business development in corporate. People have phenomenal experience, but don't always know how to bring that into the conversation, right? So I think those are two really important ways. And the third, I would say, across any mentorship relationship is just establishing the human trusted relationships, right? It all comes down to the people relationships, and building that trust goes a long way.
Absolutely. And the trust is critical for sure. And Chandler, just very quickly, as a former Senate chief, you definitely understand the importance of a great network. Everyone on the Hill, I think, does. So from your experience in the Senate to now Workday, where do you see the biggest challenge to getting this type of network off the ground?
Yep, I'll do it super quickly. So two words. One is willingness, and the other is intentionality. So willingness is like the secret to my career has been like really not being afraid to be like, yeah, I don't know. And on Capitol Hill, if you're not afraid to say, I don't know, there are experts. They're just around and they'll take the time. People will sit down with you. And so much of it is just being willing to start that conversation, even in an informal mentor. And then intentionality. I've been really at home at Workday in our regular career conversations with our people leaders. That's our managers, connections and identifying connections and having a conversation. Who do you need to know? Who do we hook you up with? That's a regular part of what we do. And it's intentional and it's expected. And so it's nothing to see an email come through to say, hey, one-on-one, you came up in a conversation with my manager. Can I grab a little time with you? Just want to talk to you about XYZ. And the expectation is just say, yeah, 100%, let's do it. So willingness and intentionality. I
love the willingness. You just got to jump in. And I think that's very much encouraged in Invariant, which is nice for me, at least, because I love to kind of jump in. I hate to cut that segment short, but we have come to the end, a minute late to our Dialogue for Change. Thank you all for the attendance, and thank you to the panelists for today's discussion. I've really, really enjoyed this. Please look for emails from Invariant for more details about the Dialogue for Change series, and for additional diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging resources. You can follow us on Twitter at Invariant or LinkedIn. Thank you all again so much. I've really enjoyed this. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brian.